All right, hello and welcome to a special presentation of the Champion Enablement Ask the Expert series. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Rob Pickering. Rob, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, thanks, Britt. Rob Pickering. I work in our Chief Innovation Office. I'm an evangelist, technically, and my role is to speak to customers, do events, host executive briefings, etc. Before coming to ServiceNow about a year ago, I was the CIO at AAA Allied Group, and we were a ServiceNow customer as well. So I've got many years of background in ServiceNow.
Well, we have that in common. And you know, I think because of some of our shared background, we end up talking to each other a lot about things we hear from other customers and maybe what we were experiencing when we were customers. And one of the things that I think both of us have found is that sometimes the jargon around ServiceNow and around certain kinds of service management can be difficult to, there's a steep learning curve, and it can be difficult to navigate some of the things that we offer. And so one of the things that we hear a lot is people kind of conflating the ideas around services, CIs, assets. Could you maybe explain some of the context to tell us the difference between those things?
Sure. So, and we had the same problem starting out as a customer as well. Everybody seems to be familiar with and want to use the term asset. And they want to speak of everything that they have in their environment as assets. And of course, assets have financial implications. And so those tend to be things that people outside of IT are also focused on. But what the IT group really wants to focus on are configuration items, CIs. And CIs make up the basis of the configuration management database. These are things that are could be equipment, could be applications, could be services, are essentially anything that you want to track a metric on are CIs. Some CIs are assets as well, and some CIs are actually higher level applications or even business services and service offerings. And so we'll get into that as we get deeper.
So as we're talking about these things, and you mentioned that we're going to be looking specifically into these configuration items, and that's what's going to go into our CMDB. And certainly, if we want to solve the CMDB puzzle, then we're going to have to make sure that we're focusing on a solidly built CMDB. But one of the things that our customers say to us all the time is that, you know, it's never really going to be at 100%, that data in the CMDB. And if it's never going to be at 100%, how do you motivate people to do the work to keep it updated?
Sure. So a lot of folks, and I run into this issue with customers all of the time. One of my favorite questions to ask a customer, whether I'm in an executive briefing or talking one-on-one, doing a strategy session, is where are you with your CMDB? How much have you invested in it? And I'm surprised as an employee how often customers come back and say, well, we've got some stuff in there, we don't have a lot. And so then I dig in and I say, well, where are you tracking your configuration items? Where are you And so that's where the confusion comes from, because what they end up with are asset lists, right? They have all their hardware in a spreadsheet somewhere, but they haven't actually taken the time to push that information into ServiceNow and be able to leverage it as CIs. So really the value comes from being able to track the information that's in the CMDB and relate it out to other information that you're speaking to your customers about. Ultimately, the purpose of a CMDB is to map the infrastructure that you have inside your organization, the relationships of that infrastructure, and then the mapping of that infrastructure up into service offerings and then eventually to business services, so that you can essentially create this translation layer, right? And it helps you translate from your end customers and what they're speaking about, the issues they're having, the problems they're having in their language, to what the IT team knows about the infrastructure itself. And so I can then freely move between the CI that has, you know, some sort of a service outage to the business service that outage is impacting. Speak to my customers intelligently in their own language. So you really, it serves as a dual purpose, that translation layer, but also a collection, an inventory of the CIs that you have that then also allow you to then do this asset management piece as well.
So as I'm doing that, as I'm focusing on getting this nice clean data so I can do a better job of really understanding the health of my organization, it sounds like is what you're saying. There are some areas of the organization that may have a pretty clean list of CIs that are already available, and then there may be others that only have themselves at about 40% of their data available. So, if I have to choose between those two teams, one who's working at about 90% and one who's working on 40, should I really just try to get everybody up to 100%, or what would you suggest?
No. So the CMDB is a living thing, right? Your network, your infrastructure is always changing. There's always an incident coming in. There's always a change coming in. We always have new equipment being deployed, new applications being installed. So getting it to 100% is nowhere near as important as having a more consistent level of accuracy. The number one thing with the CMDB is that you want your people to trust it. So you want to recognize that it's as accurate as it can be, but also that it's never going to be perfect. So it's okay to have it be 80%. If you have an area of the organization where the health of their CMDB area of responsibility is only at 40%, then focus on getting the 40 up to 80 rather than focusing on getting the 80 up to 100. Those are incremental improvements, 80 to 100, that aren't going to drive nearly as much value as getting the 40% folks up to 80.
And it seems like as I charge my phone, right, as I get closer and closer to 100% full, it just takes longer and longer and longer as it approaches 100%. And it feels like that may also be the case when you're talking about getting those teams, CMDBs, really, really nice and clean, is moving from 40% to 80% data involved in your CMDB could probably be more efficient and definitely more beneficial than making up those last couple of percentage points that in that other area. So that's great to know that we don't have to be striving for, you want to strive for perfection, but you want to make sure that you have that level of consistency across your organization. At 90% would be something for us to shoot for. So as we're doing this, not every service is exactly the same that our CIs are rolling up into. Is it important for us to differentiate those kinds of things as we're putting this data in, or does everything just go in the same way?
Yeah. So I actually posted a link down there somewhere that points to a community article that I wrote that helps to try to differentiate between all these different services that the ServiceNow CMDB tends to focus on. Really, for me and for most folks, there are three very important ones. The very bottom is a configuration item. And that configuration item is anything that you've got that you want to track metrics about. And metrics could be name or connections or IP address or operating system, any of those types of things that can make up a CI. The CIs then move up into service offerings. And a service offering in ServiceNow terminology is derived from a business service, but it refines that parent business service to specific business needs. Service offerings in the ServiceNow environment are special because you can track availability, you can do SLA adherence, and outages. When you log an outage, get automatically tracked to make up that SLA adherence. So there's some special capabilities in the CMDB around service offerings. So you definitely want to have those if you want to track, like, hey, this service is available 90% of the time, and we're going to have an SLA to that. And you actually want to be able to track that by putting outages in. Then service offerings support those very top level business services. And business services are in your customer's language. So we're not going to talk about Microsoft Exchange at a business service level. We're going to talk about email, or we're going to talk about intranet, or we're going to talk about these more abstract concepts that your business users are used to, right? They don't say Microsoft Exchange isn't responding. They say things like email isn't working, or they might say Outlook is down, and maybe that's the way they refer to it. Or the intranet's inaccessible, or I can't get to the internet, right? These are the business services that they're used to consuming. So we want to use that language at that very top level. So really differentiating between those three is important. And then there are also several others that, depending upon different areas of the platform that you might be using, like event management, for example, there are some other types of business services and service offerings that get used in those specific areas. But those three main ones, CI, service offering, and business service, make up the bulk.
So as you're talking about that, and you're talking about these business services, and I love this point about making sure that you're using your customer's language, using email instead of Exchange, I think is a really great point. But in order for a lot of those things like event management to work, you have to have mapped these services really well. And maybe not everybody's using Discovery, and maybe we're not all using service mapping. So if I was going to have to manually map some services so I could make those connections that, somebody says email is down and we have, OWA, right? That they could be talking about. Nobody uses OWA anymore, but it could be.
Yeah, sure.
Totally. It could be their email on their laptop. It could be something that they're using on their phone. We want to make sure that we really understand what all of those variations are, and you have to have well-mapped services for that. But again, if we are doing it manually, we're going to have to pick what we're going to be mapping. So if I'm doing it manually, what is it that I'm going to map? What do you suggest?
So, you always want to, again, you're going to hear this a lot through this session. You want to talk to your users. You want to find out what are the big important services that your users need and your end customers need in order for them to do their jobs. Email's an easy one. Maybe there's calendaring. Maybe there's communications, right? Which could be chat, and there's telephony, or voice communications, right? So you start with the end in mind, and you have that business service. Then you can start to look at, okay, well, to provide email, what are the different service offerings that are inside of that? So you mentioned one potential one, which is the web email, right? Being able to access email over the web. Another one could be mobile email, support for a mobile client. And a third could be desktop email, right? Maybe that's even Outlook. Those are the service offerings that you could then define that make up that business service. Then a layer under that is, okay, what are all the CIs? What's all the infrastructure components that make up support for OWA, right? What are the servers it runs on? What are the applications that run on those servers? Where's the authentication happening? What's the network components that actually connect those servers together? And you go through that mapping effort. As a customer, we started with manual maps. We built our CMDB by importing spreadsheets of those asset spreadsheets I talked about at the beginning. And then we leveraged SCCM's plugin that ServiceNow provides, which is free, and then use that to pull in a bunch of configuration items from our SCCM database. And then I personally wrote imports from our monitoring system, which happened to be SolarWinds Orion. So we would merge all of that information into the CMDB and create that initial infrastructure view and build the relationships between that infrastructure. But then we started mapping from the business service layer down. And then, of course, we realized that this was going to be a lot of effort to maintain those maps, to build those maps, et cetera. So we went out and purchased ServiceNow Discovery, which helps you map that infrastructure layer, find all of those CIs, everything with an IP address, and the applications, and automatically build the relationships, and then eventually service mapping, which allows you to find those business services that your users are talking about and then map them down into the infrastructure components. So we have ways to automate it, but you can also do it manually.
Yeah, and honestly, the capability to do it automatically is so fantastic. I think we've all done manual mapping before and realized just how painful it is and time consuming, right? I mean, yeah. you just spend forever working on that.
And really,
go ahead.
It's the maintenance of it as well, right? So
yes.
it's even once you get past the initial building of the maps, it's okay, well, this server is no longer supporting that service offering, and now I got to go update the map, right?
Right. You constantly have that feeling of being mom and having to run behind everyone. You're like, I just cleaned this room. Please.
Yep.
Use a coaster. You know, like I feel like that's how it can feel if you don't have any automated capabilities available. Now, I did hear as you were talking about some of these things, you were talking about event management. You talked about your customers submitting incidents, or maybe those incidents could become a problem over time. Maybe that problem is caused by a change. That problem needs to be solved by a change, right? And so as I hear you mentioning all these other areas of ServiceNow, is what you're saying that that having a well-mapped CMDB can help with your other applications as well?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So if you think about what a CI is, it is a piece of infrastructure. It is a virtual server. It is an application that's running in your environment. Well, those are the things that can also have issues. Those are the things that you have to make changes to. Those are the things that you might want to help to investigate as you're doing a root cause analysis as part of a problem. And we didn't even speak to this, but those are the things that you might want to automate, right? You might want to orchestrate updates to, like Active Directory and adding a user account into Active Directory. You're going to have to do that to CIs. You're going to have to pick a server that I'm going to connect to and authenticate and go through that server to add the account into Active Directory. So all of these components in ServiceNow leverage the CMDB. The CMDB is part of our platform, and that platform supports all of the applications that we provide, whether it's incident problem change or customer service or security operations or vulnerability response or security response or vulnerability, or even HR, right? You're making changes and updating and automating infrastructure. And so by having a CMDB, you can connect them all, right? The value of the CMDB will amplify the value that you have in each of the different business applications that we provide. As an example, you might have a piece of infrastructure, a laptop, that somebody has reported an issue with, and you solve that issue. Then later, they report another issue on that laptop, and you solve that issue. And then maybe they report a third issue, and this has to go to a root cause analysis to try to figure out what's really happening, so you create a problem ticket. You can link all of these to the CI itself. And then the inventory manager, right, looks at all of this stuff that's happening to that one CI. We've had a bunch of incidents, we've had a couple changes, we've had a problem. I think that piece of equipment might be bad, right? Because I have visibility into everything that was happening to it. And I can see that this one has way more incidents on it than a similar piece of equipment that we delivered to somebody else. We're going to pull that in and replace it for that end customer so that they experience a better solution. And then we're going to pull this back and do some additional work on it, or maybe send it out for repair. If you don't have a CMDB, then you're not linking any of these things, right? You're depending upon the person being the linkage, that it was Bob's laptop and we do all this work on Bob's laptop. But then maybe I don't see things like changes that happen underneath. I don't see things like applications being installed because I don't have any CI to link them together. Even better, people will put in business services as part of their incident volume, and that can help you track what's supporting that business service, and therefore where do I need to go look for the underlying root cause.
So out of that, and I'm going to go a little bit outside of the questions that we have already identified. What I heard you talking about was, I mean, I love that the CMDB is kind of Rome in this situation. All roads lead there, right? Yep. And so if you have data there that supports the health of your organization, you just have greater visibility, and that lets you know what you really need to be doing next. The CMDB can really help you plan for the future because you can see, oh, I've got servers that are 10 years old. You know, I gotta make some plans for that, right? But the other thing that you mentioned, you were talking about being able to see all of the services, and one of the things that I have personally noticed in customers' CMDBs when I was a customer, we had this in our CMDB, is that. And this kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, which is I see people listing in there at the same level servers alongside maybe applications that they've purchased. So you could have like PowerPoint listed as a CI, right? And you could have individual laptops that are listed as a CI. And so just to kind of bring it back to the beginning, can you give us a little bit of an overview? What does that look like, and how does an organization determine this is what needs to go in the CMDB, and this is a service that this should be mapping to?
So if you go back to service offerings and being able to look at a service offering and track availability, track SLA adherence, track outages against it, those three things can kind of help you identify whether or not what you're delivering is a service, right? Is this something that I want to track the availability of? Is this something that if there's an outage, I want to track the outage of it? So that right away says to me, PowerPoint isn't a service, right? PowerPoint is an application. Maybe it's a CI that is installed on a single computer. But it's not a service that I'm delivering because I'm not going to track the availability of PowerPoint in our organization and report that up somewhere, right? This also gets to talking about kind of an asset and service life cycle, right? When you're talking about physical hardware, you can immediately say, hey, I have to procure it, right? Somebody's going to order it. I have to get it, I have to inventory it and put it in inventory, and then eventually I have to deploy it. And when you do those things, you're really talking about part of an asset life cycle. Those are things that you have and that you care about with assets. When you think about a virtual machine, right, something that is not an asset, it doesn't have material worth, if you will, then you don't really do procure and deploy and inventory, right? It's ordered and then delivered, right? And that's it. And then perhaps it becomes a CI while it's running. But so does a laptop. The laptop has a life where once it's in somebody's hands and it's being used in production, it's been installed, that I now want to track changes to it and incidents to it. I want to track its configuration. I want to know what's running on it. I want to know what patch levels it's at. Those are all components of using it, of configuration. So that's the piece of that life cycle where it's a configuration item and an asset. It's still an asset because it's a physical piece of hardware. And then eventually it reaches the end of its useful life. So I'm now going to stop tracking its configuration because it's being retired. So I take it out of the installed status and I put it into a retired status. And now all of a sudden, I no longer care about it as a configuration item, right? Because it's not in use, but I still care about it as an asset until I've retired it, destroyed it, gotten rid of it, sold it, whatever, and it's no longer an asset from a financial standpoint. So you can think of that as a big circle from order, procure, deploy, and then use, and all the use piece is when it's a CI. And then through retirement and through moving it off your books, essentially, is the tail end of that asset piece. So that's kind of that service life cycle. And when you're trying to differentiate between a CI or an asset, you can use that and kind of think about it. But also services are things that I'm actually delivering, that I want to track, that I want to have outages about, that I want to know availability of. And so that helps differentiate between asset, CI, and service.
I really loved that cycle there, and I feel like we should make a little image of that and put it as like an appendix to our conversation. Oh, that would be great. That'd be great, because it can be so confusing as you're going through this, and as a customer, I have gone through data certification efforts, and they're challenging for many reasons. Some of those are just that getting people to own the data in ServiceNow isn't the same as getting someone to own the server, right? I'm sorry, the service. It's not the same as getting someone to own the service. It's not the same as getting someone to own the CIs. They may be fine with all of those things, but not want to own it in ServiceNow. So that can be very stressful in and of itself, just getting people to be willing to say, not only am I going to make this information correct today, but throughout time, my team is going to continue to own the maintenance of that data on top of the services that we provide. And so as you're going through this cycle, if I'm a service owner and I'm saying, okay, here's all the data that I need to put in, and I may get an intern or somebody that's just going to do some data entry or something like that happens a lot, and you just say, all right, here's a spreadsheet. Well, it can be very difficult to differentiate when something should be put in to begin with, when something should be removed because it is, or moved into a state of retired, right? And being able to look at every single CI and say, where on that cycle does this CI live? I think is something that a lot of us struggle with. And so you end up with these CIs that that server hasn't been in use in 12 years and it's still sitting in there in a state of active, right?
Right.
Because what does active mean? And I think if we can align those states in our CMDBs with this life cycle that you're talking about, it'll probably make it a lot easier for us to maintain the integrity of that data.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
Data certification is a rough time. Do you have any thoughts about data certification?
Yeah. So one of the things, we talked at the beginning about taking from 40% to 80%. My first question would be, where do you get those percentages? We have tools in the platform that allow you to look at things like CMDB health. And so it will look at the CMDB and allow you to say, here are some of the key fields that I want to have filled out for any CI. Here are relationships that these CIs have. And so where are the orphan CIs? Where's the CI that was just entered, but it was never related to anything? And so from a logical standpoint, that means it's not connected to the network. It's not supporting any business services. So you wonder, well, then why is it there at all? So it could be that server that is sitting over in the corner that is in a state of active, but it's been orphaned because it's no longer connected to anything. And so we should go take steps to move it out. So we have a series of CMDB health dashboards that will show you those percentages, right? 40% around orphan CIs, or 50% around compliance, right? So I can see by drilling into that health dashboard, here's all the CIs that are missing key fields. And so from a data certification standpoint, that can make it a little easier, because I will assign CIs out to people. And then I will say, look, if you receive this notification or this task, go to the CMDB health dashboard and understand that your CI is missing key fields. So we just want you to go fill those in for any of the CIs that you own. To relate it in some way, shape, or form to the rest of the infrastructure because it's been orphaned. I'm trying to think of another one. Maybe it's been set in a install state, and that install state is beyond its useful life, right? So this was supposed to be replaced every 3 years, but this CI has been sitting out there as active, installed for 5 years. So we want you to go double check that in fact it's continuing to provide useful services and it hasn't just been forgotten about. All of those aspects can be in that CMDB health dashboard and can be made available so that folks can see it and can drill in and can move themselves from the 40% to the 80%. Focus on where you're weak rather than focusing on where you're incrementally below that perfection number.
So this CMDB health dashboard that you're talking about, is this something that's available like in benchmarks out in high, or is it in our customers' instances?
So it's in both places, to be honest. So it is in customer instances and is available as a dashboard, but it's also at part of benchmarks. But the CMDB health stuff, I think, came out with Jakarta. So originally we had a bunch of peer benchmarks that came out in Istanbul. And those are available via High. You can see them out on High if you've opted in. But we added in Jakarta a bunch of CMDB health metrics. So you can also now see CMDB health and some key metrics around CMDB and how you relate to your peers. So it's available in both.
Perfect. I did not know that, so I feel like just kind of lucked out on that question. Okay, so I want to come back now that we've kind of gone down that data certification rabbit hole, and we've talked a little bit more about making sure that we're putting the right kinds of data into the CMDB. I want to come back because I feel like you have more to say about how having a good CMDB amplifies the value that you can gain from each of the applications in our portfolio. And so, are there any applications specifically that you're just like, if you don't have a good CMDB, this is going to suffer?
Yeah, so, me personally, when people are talking about an implementation, whether it's an initial implementation of maybe ITSM capabilities, incident problem change knowledge, or it's a future implementation of an additional application, I often get asked, where should I start? And my answer has always been, start at the CMDB, right? Make sure that you have the CMDB built. It doesn't have to be perfect. It does have to be instilling trust. So this isn't a bunch of spreadsheets into, and those spreadsheets, we don't know if they're accurate or not. And now we're just going to populate the CMDB with a bunch of information that we don't know whether or not it's any good. And then people won't trust CMDB. So start with the CMDB, spend some time around building it out. I liken the CMDB to the foundation of a house. You're not going to sell a house because it has a great foundation, right? It's not terribly interesting. It's not terribly sexy to talk about a CMDB. And real estate agents do not show you the house and say, let's go to the basement first and show you how great the foundation is. No, they want to go to the kitchen. They want to go to the master bath. They want to go to the big living room with the bay windows. So that's all the rest of ServiceNow. CMDB is the basement, the great foundation. But that makes for a great house. It makes for a solid house, because the number one issue that you would have buying a new home is if the foundation is cracked, if it's leaking water, if it needs repair, right? So all of a sudden that'll make your decision for you. Nope, we're not going to do that house because the foundation's not sound. So start with CMDB. That CMDB can get you. I also hear a lot about asset management. People are constantly putting asset management as a high priority around their ServiceNow implementation. Asset management is great. Asset management should be done. But if you build your CMDB out, you get 80% of asset management essentially for free. So that now I have the CMDB, I have all of the configuration information, I have it all mapped, I have it related. And now when I go do asset management, I really just have to focus on the two tails, the procurement deployment and on the retirement and decommission, right? And so that helps complete that asset management story. If instead you started as an asset management project, as we haven't actually done the analogy yet, but assets become CIs, could become assets again. So you have 5 fingers, but you only have 1 thumb. So not every finger is a thumb. And so that's kind of the same way as CIs to assets. So you get that 80% for free by doing the CMDB, plus by doing the CMDB, you get additional value for every application that you have that you deploy in ServiceNow. And you amplify the value of applications you haven't even deployed yet. So maybe I now want to go deploy HR, but HR can leverage the entire CMDB, all the business services that we've already built out, and you can jumpstart the value that HR can bring you by having that robust CMDB already built out that is service aware.
Make it sound so exciting.
It is. I love CMDB.
You know, it's so exciting, which is why we have you talk about it, because you know, CMDB is one of those things that a lot of people look at it as like a necessary evil, right?
Right.
We have to do it. We don't want to, right? Every time I meet someone who tells me that they're a configuration management specialist, I'm just like, God bless you, you know, because the information is so necessary to the health of our organizations. So as we're talking about all of this, I find myself just thinking about that there's such a wealth of knowledge that you have. And I know you've already put a blog out there, and I want to let everybody know that we do have some CMDB best practices that are available. We link to from the Champion Center in our program management section. So if you have any further questions, first of all, please feel free to ask them on this page. And then you can also take a look at some of our CMDB best practices. We have them all over HI. We have them in the Champion Enablement Center. Rob has provided some great information as well. So Rob, is there anything else you'd like to add? You'd like to let the great people know?
I would also add, I'm pretty sure there are other Ask the Experts series that have talked about CMDB as well. And some of those are really great. And there was recently a Service Matters blog post about the CMDB with one of our other customers, Car Auction Services, KAR Auction Services. So if you search for that in the community, you'll find that Service Matters blog post as well that talks about the CMDB and how important that customer felt it was to their implementation. And I felt that meshed really well with what we were talking about today.
It really did. And in fact, you sent me something that you were just like, look how perfect this timing is. And it really was. And I know that we keep hearing these buzzwords about software asset management, but every time I've talked to a customer lately around software asset management, or even they just happen to bring up software asset management while we're talking, I consistently point them back to the CMDB. And I think that's a really important point for our viewers at home is, you know, if you're considering software asset management, it absolutely is something that is essential for your organization, but you're never going to, you're never going to get to the level of help that you want if you have dirty data. Everyone knows that. And the CMDB really is where to clean it. So
yeah, and on software asset management, you know, I kind of went through the example of a laptop and a hardware asset management. Software asset management is a new application that we're delivering on the ServiceNow platform. Software asset management is all about, you know, are we in compliance with our licensing? What components do we have out there? How do they roll up? How do I build these software suites, et cetera? Guess where all that information is stored? In the CMDB, right? And so discovery and the ability to go and find where these applications are running is core to the value that software asset management delivers as well. So even if software asset management, the component that we provide, isn't something that's on your radar right now, you can get a jump start on it by building out that CMDB, having those applications and application suites identified inside your infrastructure, running on different hardware or virtual hardware. And then when you decide to go do software asset management, you've already done 80% of it.
Yeah, it's really exciting, because I know that software asset management is kind of a buzzword right now, and I know that it's something that we're really focusing on as an organization, as are quite a few of our customers. And if you already have a CMDB that's functioning, and you've gotten yourself to that kind of level of service that you can trust the data that's available in there, then software asset management is just kind of a logical next step. But if you try to take this step without doing all that due diligence at the beginning, then I think that's when our implementations, the implementation could suffer. So,
and it becomes harder. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, so with that, that's really all I have today, Rob. I really appreciate your time and you talking to us about the CMDB today. It feels like you could never talk enough about the CMDB. Now, and I don't just mean you, I mean just in general, because since ServiceNow has been around, the CMDB has been a primary talking point. It feels like we still, have to continue pushing, for these health assessments within our own organization. Yep. So I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. Lovely to have you today. Thank you everyone for watching. We will be having some additional Ask the Expert sessions over the coming weeks. We're going to be doing information about the total economic impact of ServiceNow, which we're really excited about. And then we're going to do some deep dives into governance, risk, and compliance. We're going to talk about the product. We're also going to talk about governance, risk, and compliance as it relates to your organization. So stay tuned for those. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.